Well, maybe we could just start by asking you why you haven't made any investments in Bitcoin. What has held you back? Have you not seen enough business plans that piqued your interest? Is it skepticism about whether or not this has actually got a future? Maybe Stefan, you speak to that. Have you been approached by any Bitcoin entrepreneurs with business plans?
So we saw from April 2012 to April 2013 1,987 business plans. There was not a single Bitcoin business plan among these 2,000. So I assume, which I really like, that many of the Bitcoin entrepreneurs are more on the bootstrapping side of things. I think that is one reason. The next reason is, as a VC, I used to be an entrepreneur. Now I'm at VC since 2 years, and you can already feel you tend to become lazy as a VC. As an entrepreneur, you're always very much forward, and you want to push the limits. As a VC, you wait until somebody is approaching you, so it's more the boring side. And the reason why I gladly accepted Pamir's invite is that I want to be more on the active side, more outgoing, and see and first understand what actually is really going on with Bitcoin.
What about you?
It's the same sort of story as Stefan. In fact, we haven't received in our inbox any Bitcoin company per se. But I mean, something's going to happen here. It's absolutely going to happen here. And if you don't get out to listen to people, nobody knows you're waiting. You have an inbox. So this is part of the outreach we have towards this community. Exactly. We're looking forward to it, to see what's going on. In terms of timing, from what I've learned, though, I mean, the industry is extremely new. There's a huge element of regulatory uncertainty. If you look back a year ago, the Bitcoin world was tainted a lot by money laundering issues and all of this stuff, and we're investing money from the old world. We're investing people from fractional reserve banks and things give us money to invest in Bitcoin, which is kind of ironic in a way. But the money that's fueling this is the money that's coming back through the system. And so we have to these guys who are running the endowment funds and the pension funds and all this stuff that entrust us with the money. We need to be fairly certain that they're coming into at least a regulatory secure, a legally viable framework, and that hasn't. We heard earlier it's beginning to come together now, which is fantastic, and it gives us the regulatory certainty that I think we need to go upstream with our money.
Are there any hoops that you need to jump through for your investors for their comfort level? I mean, it seems like the regulatory environment is still very uncertain. That perhaps that would still be a barrier to putting money into it.
I think we as these funds and things, they entrust us with their money because we're going to invest in innovative ideas and new ideas and take chances. When you go into the phone world, or we have large investments in self-driving cars. If anybody wants to buy a self-driving car, come and see me afterwards. We can do that. And these things, people trust us. This is another area where regulation is nowhere near in place. But I have to be able to present a credible case upstream to these guys so they feel like I'm not completely lost my mind when I invest $1 million in a Bitcoin exchange or something, and it goes wrong, because 99% of our investments do indeed go wrong. So that's the balance I have to try and work. But they trust me, I hope.
And Nick, how does Bitcoin compare to other investments that you're making in the financial services industry, and de-ossifying the financial services industry, so to speak?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll give you a few ways in which maybe a different way of thinking about it, which comes from our lens in looking at other things in financial services. Bitcoin has a few characteristics that are very different than most of what you see in fintech innovation. The first one I'd point out is that Bitcoin has virality to it, which is something we've seen a lot in other sectors, in music and news and plenty of other things on the internet. But one fact, people have lots of strange behaviors around money. One of those behaviors is not typically talking about it in a very public way or tweeting about it or sharing it on Facebook. Bitcoin is the first thing really we've seen that people are, once they're involved in the system and once they have the idea, they're quite eager to share it. So that has contributed to the very rapid growth we've seen. The second thing is, I think this point was made earlier maybe by Ter, Bitcoin is a new system, and a new system has many challenges, which we've been talking about all day in terms of needing to be regulated, but also has many advantages. A lot of the traditional financial services entrepreneurs we see come, and they're figuring out ways of building on top of the existing infrastructure, which has historically been the only practical thing to do, but it has all sorts of limitations that you don't have when you're operating in a new system. And the lack of regulation today, and some regulation will have to be grafted on top of it, but it still creates a system for innovation that will in the longer term be much more advantaged, and we can see that with something like the internet. And then the third thing is Bitcoin, by its global sort of borderless nature, and the fact that it in many ways is electronic cash, it serves a lot of consumers in the financial services world who are underserved. So because people tend to operate within the existing financial system, there's a whole informal or underbanked part of the economy that isn't touched by a lot of financial services innovation. So if we look at, for example, Lending Club, or which is sort of state of the art or the most successful company in peer-to-peer lending, these guys are still really just serving prime. That's a high FICO score, good credit customers just in the United States. Bitcoin is accessible to, as we've seen today, everybody from Slovenia to Nairobi to the 3+ billion people who have mobile phones but no bank accounts.
So we've seen some big name investors, Peter Thiel being one of them, putting money into Bitcoin. Is that a turning point? I mean, what needs to happen in the investor space to get other big investors interested in Bitcoins? Michael, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, there is an element of herd mentality, as I went to earlier around all this. And it's this respectability that you need when you're going upstream to the guys who've given you the money. If a lot of respectable people are in the space already, then it's a lot easier for me to justify doing something which is weird. So I think that's a self-reinforcing situation, and it's very helpful, obviously. And I think we're very much getting to the point where the exposure of the investors and our customers is there, and that's going to make things a lot easier.
It's certainly helpful, but it all very much reminds me on when I pitched online auctions in Germany in 1997. There was a total misunderstanding and not getting it what the internet is about to change. And I have a very similar gut feeling that the same is happening now with Bitcoin. I mean, we are using the word Bitcoin as a new currency, but it's the first currency without an interest rate. I mean, it's totally unheard of in many ways. So my main skepticism is if Bitcoin becomes really successful, really mass market, I hardly can imagine that there will be any legal way. Because frankly, the governments would lose all the powers. I mean, every government has, in the end, financially, they have the tax system, so the fiscal policy, and they have the interest rate policy. With Bitcoin, there is no interest rate policy. So maybe if everything turns out to be great, we're going to see a global currency. We don't need the interest rates anymore, and hopefully we have a global tax system. That would be the by far best outcome from a very macro level looking at this. But from a more VC point of view, it's probably, yes, I feel there is a lot of stuff happening over the next 5 years, and I'm actually very happy seeing more VCs here today participating, and I'm pretty sure that we as Passion will do the one or the other investment in this sector.
Well, Nick, what do you make of that? It's a currency without an interest rate. Is that a major impediment? How does that change things?
I don't see it as an impediment. I see it as an opportunity. The fact that it is very different, I guess at this point, the way I'd say I look at it is it's a bit of a red herring to compare it to fiat currency. That's a very popular thing to do, and there's certainly many people in this room who might be excited about that future vision. But in the short term, Bitcoin is a technology that solves problems for people, and it doesn't need to compete with the US dollar or the British pound. What it needs to do is solve problems for people who want to move money more easily around the internet, people who want to do small dollar international remittances without paying exorbitant fees, or people who want to do microtransactions, which aren't possible today under their current internet payment network. So it's really a new payment network, a new store of value for people who want to use it that way. And at $1.5 billion or whatever the market cap is today, it's hardly a sort of fly for the U.S. government or for Brussels to to swat at. Now, it doesn't mean it hasn't been interesting to government because of reasons of law enforcement, but I think we are a long, long way away from the point at which governments need to worry about this as a competitor to fiat currency, unless somebody from a central bank of a country is here and wants to jump on the Bitcoin train. I'd certainly encourage that.
Okay, well, what about regulation? How much of an impediment is that to big investments in Bitcoin? Stefan.
This, as Michael pointed out, if everything on the regulation side is cleared and so on, it's a boring case for early stage investing. Yeah, you need this gray area. You know, I got involved with music, with all this stuff. You with Skype. If there's no gray area, there's hardly any room for great successes. So no, the stadium. I'm perfectly fine with this.
Yeah, maybe we can touch on that. I mean, on the music, on the Skype story, Skype was not a communication network at all. It was a piece of communication software. And if we considered ourselves regulated as a piece of consumer software, downloadable software, you fall under a completely different category to a communication network. And this is part of the argument that we can find within communities like this. So you're not covered by the same thing. A piece of software is regulated the same way as Microsoft is regulated selling Microsoft Office. The great thing about Skype, to go back to, is a decentralized encrypted network. It's a little bit like the Bitcoin network in itself. It's totally out of control. There is no central point of control. You can close the company down totally, and people will still be speaking with Skype 24 hours a day. It won't make any difference. And that doesn't fit into an existing regulatory regime at all. You have to either be ignored by them, because in fact a lot of regulators, if it's not on their table, they're actually not interested. They're interested in stuff that is on their table, that they have a set of rules they need to follow. If you say, well, it's nothing to do with me, that's fine. They go, okay, fine. Whew, that's a relief. I don't have to think about that. I can go home at 5 o'clock again and sleep well tonight, which is the job of most regulators, keeping their, what do we say in German? You keep your white coat clean or something like that as a civil servant.
There's no such thing, but other than that, I think regulatory is, he's Danish, he gets it. And regulatory is one thing. I think much more important for the success of Bitcoin is actually the frustration of the users. And as a VC, as an investor, you always look at the user side. I'm in the internet or digital now since 16, 17 years. The only thing that got more complicated, the only thing, wherever Skype, other stuff, listening to music, everything got easier, got better. But payment is a pain in the ass. I mean, online payment, we all tried with the credit card, and then they're asking for this dedicated extra password and so on. This is crap. So from a user's perspective, I think the mass market is as ripe as it gets. And we should actually focus on that, delivering great solutions for the users, for what the people want, and the regulatory, most of the time they follow anyway.
Right. Well, Nick, what do you make of that? What are the best opportunities in terms of Bitcoin infrastructure? Where are you looking to invest next?
Yeah, I'll answer that question and then make a point on regulatory too. I think it's exactly what Stefan has raised. Right now, Bitcoin is, I think we were talking before the panel, it's in many ways it's like where the internet was in the early days, maybe before the browser, in terms of its usability. So it's mostly techies, geeks, crypto anarchists, people who are excited as early adopters who have figured out how to use it, but it's not accessible to the average person. So if you think about the core infrastructure services, a lot of them have been talked about today: exchanges, wallets, merchant services, all these things. Very talented entrepreneurs are starting to work on now, and they're all interesting. But I think as investors, we need to be cognizant of the fact that the earliest investments in the internet, so maybe a regional ISP, were not necessarily the best investments. What we've been looking for at Ribbit is people who are building trusted consumer brands and experiences. And we think that those are enduring. If you look across the financial services sector, people, it's very important who they entrust their money to, entrust their livelihood to. So with the partners we've been working with in the ecosystem, we've been stressing that, encouraging them to focus on security, to get regulated, which I think is a very important part of the whole ecosystem moving forward. And to always put the user and the user experience first.
But so in terms of regulation, you're pushing for more regulation. And what about the state-by-state regulatory moves that we've seen recently? I mean, how does that complicate the picture?
Yeah, I think it would. I would not characterize it as we're pushing for more regulation.
I mean, pushing your companies to comply
To be
with
regulated.
whatever. Yeah.
Our view is that when new technology comes around, it takes time for regulation to catch up, and we should not be surprised that Bitcoin is creating a lot of regulatory questions and turmoil. In fact, that's what makes it so interesting, is that it's pushing the envelope. If you look at, to take a contemporary example, 3D printing creates lots of issues. People talk about, you can 3D print a gun, but just focusing on that challenge, which needs to be addressed in some way, belies the enormous opportunity that comes from distributing manufacturing and doing all the interesting things you can do with 3D printing. But from our perspective and working with our companies, what we would emphasize is that there are some reasons why financial services are regulated. It's important for you to know your customer, do proper AML compliance. This is something that government and other people need in order to get comfort. And for you to build a valuable business over time, it's important for you to figure out ways of complying with that. I think Eric mentioned this earlier. You have the choice. Being a Bitcoin company doesn't prevent you from being regulated, but in our case, we think the proper choice for building value over the long term is engaging with regulators.
Now, Michael, we were talking about this last night, that so far there's no sort of public face of Bitcoin that, someone will stand up and say, trust me,
Yeah.
buy Bitcoins. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that in terms of, there is this issue of trust, and how do you overcome that in Bitcoin?
Yeah, I mean, in the end, I think trust is a very personal subject. I mean, I trust you because I know you and I like you, and the products that you use are useful to me. And I think the trust comes through the product. We can have people stand on stage and talk all they want, but with a good product that works well, that delivers benefit, that you're referred to by your colleagues and friends and what have you, that's where the inherent trust comes. And they're the products I think we're missing at the moment. As you said, we have these very nerdy products, let's call it that, where it's virtually impossible to do any of this stuff unless you've got your famous degree in computer science that the gentleman talked about earlier, and that doesn't work. I mean, my grandma or my children or even me isn't going to be able to use this stuff without any of that. And that's where the trust comes in, through good, solid products that people believe in, that they think it's going to be there, and they give the image of professionalism and all of that, and that comes through all of that. And that's what we're missing, I think, and that would be an extremely investable project, would be something that was mass market appeal, that really gave the feeling that people are going to believe in this thing.
Well, now, Nick, you said, how many investments have you done in Bitcoin? If you could quantify it by number of companies you've invested in. I know you've been buying Bitcoins themselves, right?
Yeah. So we've been investors in Bitcoin itself, and then also an investor so far in 2 Bitcoin companies. Our approach is generally to try to make fewer investments and be more involved with our businesses. But there are lots of interesting Bitcoin companies that we've seen. Maybe we've made ourselves too available.
Did you
compared to these guys?
Did you seek them out, or
Absolutely.
Did they come to you?
Both. And it may be that there's a difference. I know there is, because we're investors here in Europe as well as in the U.S. I would say Bitcoin has entrepreneurs all over the world who are interested in it, but there may be right now more activity in Silicon Valley than there is in other places in terms of new companies being created. Although I hesitate to say that because, for example, I'm on the, if anybody here, I know there are some who are on the Bitcoin Angels group list. There are a remarkable number of communities around the world who are working on Bitcoin startups, and we've talked with investors and entrepreneurs everywhere from China to Africa to Europe to the US. So.
Someone was saying to me earlier that there's plenty of money in the Bitcoin space, and the problem is there aren't enough investable companies. Would you agree with that from what you've seen?
Since I haven't seen a single company, no, I'm the wrong guy to ask.
I have the same comment. I mean, yeah, I haven't found anything. I haven't seen anything which is interesting, but that's because it hasn't come in the inbox to a certain extent. So I don't know.
No,
What's your feeling on that?
We are we consider ourselves very early investors in the space, and they said, "When was your first investment?" And I said, "In March." So we invested in Bitcoin longer than that, but so this is we are incredibly early days, and the entrepreneurs who are coming into the space are getting better all the time, all the time, sort of month over month, and I think that'll continue for the next number of years as Bitcoin grows. And to get back to your earlier question, I think Peter Thiel, these guys, other VCs, Ribbit, our level of interest is really a function of the quality of entrepreneurs in the space. So as the quality of entrepreneurs improves, you'll see more and larger investments from more firms.
But for you two that haven't done anything, isn't the first stage to buy some Bitcoins?
Surely.
Yeah. But you haven't done even that yet.
I mean, that's a question of, as like somebody said earlier, is investing in the ecosystem as a whole, because it's a finite ecosystem at the moment. Now, that's a question of whether you're investing in Bitcoin or if you're investing in a virtual currency in general. And that's a sort of decision point one has to make, is are we interested in the idea of a global virtual currency that can be used, or are we doubling down on Bitcoin? And there are two different levels that we have to get familiar with even before we reach that point, to be perfectly honest.
And it's different. So me, looking from my own personal portfolio, yeah, I'm probably buying Bitcoin later today for my personal portfolio.
In other words, this today has persuaded you to go out and buy Bitcoin for yourself.
Yeah, I first need to understand what exactly do I have to do to buy Bitcoin. Frankly, to be really honest here, this is new. This is new stuff for me.
Use the ATM thing.
Yeah. Thanks. For a fund, no. As a fund, I mean, we are not set up in buying Bitcoins. Yeah. I mean, we are not buying public stock whatsoever. Coming back to this gray area of regulatory stuff, I'm actually not so sure. Again, from a macro level, when money started a couple of thousand years ago, there was no regulatory at all. Yeah, this all started a couple of decades ago. So the question is, and neither was the money, the way we know it these days, was actually designed to be digital. Bitcoin is the first sort of money that is designed to be digital. So the question is whether we really need, as a working digital currency, the same regulatory issues that we needed to see for analog money. Yeah, I think even that battle isn't really done yet.
Well, Nick, what would you say are the biggest risks facing Bitcoin? Is it the security of digital wallets? Is it exchanges going under? Is it where would you steer clear of, or where do you think there are the greatest problems that you could find companies that might find solutions?
I think there are risks to the rate of adoption of Bitcoin, but something that's, of course, someone should acknowledge. I think it is important to acknowledge that there are still many unknown unknowns with a system like this. It has been pounded on for 4 years by the best cryptographers and hackers in the world, so we can have some level of confidence in its technical stability. But there's still many issues, technical and governance wise, and in terms of how regulators and banking institutions will interface with it, that can certainly deserve our attention as risks. That said, by virtue of being decentralized, Bitcoin has the advantage of being able to move it at its own pace. So the biggest risk in some ways is that people lose interest in Bitcoin because it grows too slowly. I don't give this risk much weight, but I raise it because since there's no company behind Bitcoin, since there's nobody who's sitting around and sort of looking at their income statement or their cash flow, it can continue along indefinitely so long as people continue to be interested in building things on top of it. And it can wait while regulators and banks decide to get comfortable with it. Now, hopefully that happens sooner rather than later. But this is not something that I see the U.S. government or Citibank and every other bank in some sort of cabal shutting down. I mean, it's not feasible for them to do it. So in some ways, the risk is it not becoming big or it not becoming big enough fast enough.
Is potentially another risk a rival digital currency that surpasses it? And are you looking at have you invested in other digital currencies?
Yeah, absolutely. We haven't made investments yet, but certainly are very close with the guys at Ripple and have looked at other currencies. Our perspective is, first of all, there's no need for this to be a winner-take-all type situation. There are, I think, as Stefan talked earlier, there are differences between what Bitcoin is trying to accomplish and what Ripple is trying to accomplish, as an example. But one thing I would say is that there are probably so many people in this audience today who could build a better email protocol. But the challenge is not building a better mousetrap, it's getting adoption. And the genius of Bitcoin and the magic of what's brought us all here today is it's not necessarily just the technical innovation or the white paper, it's the way in which Bitcoin has been able to captivate a lot of people's imagination and build a base of supporters or owners of the system who now are bought in. And so my personal feeling is there's a snowball, and the snowball is small now, but it's gaining momentum, and it's very hard to stop traction once something's been accomplished. We saw that in many ways with different protocols in the internet, TCP/IP and many others.
Yeah, Michael, is it a snowball? I mean, compared to how you were looking at it, say, even just a few months ago.
Yeah, well, for sure, it's been growing. I think products that are going to grow globally are going to do it two ways. One is because there's a lot of marketing spend behind them and a huge push. Well, that's not going to happen here because it doesn't have a centralized place for the pushing to happen, or because there's virality amongst the users. Well, in the early adopter community we're sitting with here, then that people are going to go through a lot of hoops to try this thing, and we're going to spend 2 hours this evening trying to get it all working or whatever, and all of that, which is going to be great fun, I'm sure. But if the products aren't there, when I go and say to my mother or my sister or something, you should be using this thing, I mean, if we don't have the products for that virality curve is never going to happen because it's going to fail. The mathematics are going to show that you're never going to get to the point of critical mass in that without the customer-friendly, the consumer-friendly product or whatever it is that solves a genuine need for people. And I haven't actually seen that yet. So that's one of my issues, if you like, with the whole product is we talk about systems like international remittances and things like that people have been struggling with for years with alternative ways of managing that and never really succeeding. And I'm not sure that this fundamentally addresses that at a basic level. We talk about enabling the unbanked. Well, there are bigger issues with enabling the unbanked than which form of virtual currency to use. It's getting them to give a shit about it in the first place, arguably, and so on. And if these products aren't there, then it just continues in some sort of oblivion or whatever.
Yeah.
What do you make of that? I mean, are there bigger issues that we should be worrying about? Is it that there aren't enough decent products out there to offer genuine solutions to real problems?
Yeah. Today, I think Michael makes a very good point. Today, we're not at the level of problem solving for people yet. We're still addressing a lot of the early adopters use cases. So Bitcoin it's a protocol, it's a platform, and that's part of what makes it so exciting. Is what we're seeing right now is the base level of the platform. There are many layers that can be built on top of it, and those layers, because of the frictionless, instantaneous, irreversible nature, because it is a superior as a store of value, as a medium of exchange. The services that can be built on top of it can solve some of the problems that Michael's talking about. I mean, we take the case of international remittances. Today, it's hugely costly, hugely time-consuming, and hugely uncertain for people to make small dollar remittance payments, and that's something that can be accomplished quite well with Bitcoin. But
there's nothing out there now. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, that solves that problem.
Since you're an investor in TransferWise, I think they do a good job.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you talk about TransferWise and just because that's obviously that is solving a real problem.
Yeah. So TransferWise is a service. The company is based here in the UK, and they're using not Bitcoin but traditional payment systems and new style of user engagement to be able to make international remittances more peer-to-peer, less painful. So actually, Tavit, one of the founders, comes out of Skype. So in many ways, people would describe TransferWise as being a peer-to-peer payment system. But the underlying sort of system that they use today to fulfill this network is still the traditional banking system. So Bitcoin, other math-based currencies can become the backbone of a service like TransferWise, lower their costs, and help them remove a lot of the user headaches and operational challenge that they face. So the way I would think about it is TransferWise will be a great user of Bitcoin in the future as the regulatory picture becomes more certain.
But they're not using Bitcoin now.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a question. It's a question for them. I know they were here earlier, so they're very keen and focused on it.
But I mean, that raises the whole issue of if you've got a company that is doing genuinely sort of revolutionary, like TransferWise, they're offering real solutions, lower cost, much lower cost way to transfer money, taking out the charges that banks levy on consumers for transferring money across borders. Then doesn't that undermine the very reason for Bitcoin? Doesn't it? If Bitcoin can't step up and solve that problem at the same time, they could have other challengers using non-digital currencies.
Yeah, I guess no, I would disagree with that. I think that Bitcoin enables a much easier, lower cost, less friction user experience than TransferWise is able to deliver today. TransferWise, in my opinion, is a vast improvement. A very vast improvement on what people experience when they walk in a bank today and say, I want to send this many pounds or this many euros to a friend or to a property manager in some other country. But there still are a number of hurdles that they face in terms of the way that you deposit money, the way that they interact with their bank, and the way that they then move money, and how they handle chargebacks and other issues. TransferWise is, I think, a particularly good example of some entrepreneurs who are pushing the bleeding edge of what can be done in the existing system, and they'll be great adopters of a new system if and as it's created.
Well, Stefan, why do you think the venture capital world has been sort of, if I can say, slow to wake up to the opportunities in Bitcoin?
Talking about slowness, so right now we are talking about a market capitalization of 1.5 billion globally. That is not anything of a particular size from a venture point of view. Yeah, I think it is now about we see the early traction in here. I think both of us and others like Harry from Balderton and others here. They see a factor of 10 or 100 or even 1,000 as possible, but I wouldn't say that the VC world is slow, because frankly, a market size, a market cap of 500 million doesn't move the needle for venture investors.
And what about volatility of Bitcoin? Bitcoin prices have been all over the place over the past few months, and presumably that's a major impediment to people adopting it. Michael, I think you were mentioning this last night as well, that it's until someone can take away that risk, it'll be hard for it to go mass.
I think investing in projects that are surrounding or around volatility or hedge funds and stuff like that is just not what tech venture investing is about. We invest in products that normal people are going to use and are going to get mass market adoption. And I'm convinced that normal people in the street want stability around their money, around their transactions, around all of this stuff. The security inherent in the protocol is fantastic. The lack of chargebacks is great for merchants. I'm not sure how good it is for consumers, but it's great for merchants, and so on. But if the currency itself, if the underlying value of the thing, if you don't know what you have in your pocket today if it's different to tomorrow, then that's a problem. And the revolutionaries here will talk about, that happened in Cyprus, there was devaluation, and all sorts of other countries have had massive economic change or currency rates. The reason that the gold standard and things was dominant for a long time was it was reasonably stable. The reason people invest in diamonds is because they're reasonably stable. I think that's important.
But there's a reason why both the system gold standard failed and the following system Bretton Woods collapsed in 1972. So everything about very limited supply of money, so far the systems have eventually failed, yeah? Not saying that the same is going to happen here, but historically all the systems have failed. With Bitcoin is even, we see on the one hand, we see high volatility, and if you look to the determining factors of option pricing, it's volatility and interest. High volatility, no interest existing. So that is just another kind of strange situation. I know these days, and maybe that's part of the reason why Bitcoin is so relevant, is we used to call it the risk-free interest rate. These days we rather call it the interest-free risk rate. So to speak. So this is the macroeconomic level on the one hand, and we see this situation in Japan since more than 20 years, yeah, around the zero line. So it's going to be very, very interesting. But from an investor point of view, that's why it's so interesting to actually look at this, because there's so much uncertainty. High volatility is actually a great indicator for being very relevant for venture investing. Because there's a lot of uncertainty, and either you get it right and then you're lucky, or you, most of the time, frankly, we all get it wrong. Yeah?
Yeah.
I started 7 companies before my first one was successful. Yeah, I mean, I've been there.
I mean, as someone was mentioning before, that's one approach, the shopping bag approach. You put a lot, little bits of money in a lot of different companies just to make sure you've covered your bases. Is that a valid strategy?
It's certainly a valid strategy, and one that you'll find angel investors or venture capitalists in lots of different places pursuing. It's not our strategy. I don't know, these guys can speak to their strategy. I think in this case, if someone were interested in doing that, I would advise them to think about investing in Bitcoin itself as a way of having exposure to the trend, as opposed to investing.
See, the market making, you own a lot of Bitcoins, yeah?
Yeah.
The market making already starts here, yeah?
Yeah, exactly.
Guys, buy Bitcoins, yeah.
I'll be taking orders in the corner.
I'll buy from you.